actually, uh, I am thankful for my diagnosis in some real fundamental ways because had I had I not had I not been diagnosed with a rare life-threatening disease that almost killed me at 48, and had I not changed my trajectory, which was a joyful trajectory, I was enjoying my life back then. But if I had not changed my life, the past 10 years would not have been 10 years of becoming healthier and healthier and healthier. It would have been 10 years of debilitation, debilitation, debilitation. And even if I didn't have hereditary hemochromatosis, I would still be a 58-year-old man who was working at a bar, drinking too much, smoking cigarettes, and eating too many desserts. And so in some ways, my diagnosis with this rare and life-threatening disease is what has led me to be finally in good health because I'm mindful about it and I know that I need to be mindful about it every day.
Yeah. So this does share a lot of commonalities with superficial siderosis. You might want to look into that one. But have you tried chelation therapy?
I never have. No, I talked to the doctors about it when I was in the hospital because at that point we were looking for anything.
Yeah.
The my first couple of weeks in the hospital. So once Dr. Niab gets me from the step down unit to the cardiac ward and decides she's going to take over my care, uh, the first thing she had to do was to try and do interventions to allow me to be healthy enough to start to do the phlebotomy because my cardiac function was so weak. At first, we couldn't start with phlebotomy uh, because I couldn't lower the blood volume in my body at all, or else my heart would stop. Uh, and we talked about chelation, and the response of Dr. Nayab and another doctor who I want to mention, her name is Dr. Judith Lin, who is an absolutely incredibly brilliant hematologist, blood doctor, who was the one who guided me through this mostly. And she just had an incredible eidetic memory. She would come into the room and she would just have in her massive, beautiful brain like 100 different, you know, uh, all of the blood work, and I can kind of have some understanding of what my hemocrit level is, but there are 100 different variables, and she seemed to have them all in her brain. She was brilliant. And between Dr. Naib and Dr. Lin, they determined that the chelation therapy just wouldn't be that helpful for me, and that what we really needed to do was focus on getting me in good enough shape to start to do the more radical intervention, which was the continual phlebotomies. When they finally did get me to that point, I ended up doing 6 phlebotomies in 3 days. And so they essentially removed about half of the blood from my body over that week because they needed to just do everything they could to remove the iron. But we never went to chelation. There was some suggestion that if I drank black tea, it would help to bind the iron, and so I did that kind of stuff. But we never did a formal chelation therapy in the hospital, and I have not done it since.
You've had a fairly incredibly adventurous life, traveling, bartending, teaching. How did how did hemochromatosis affect those experiences?
You know, so there are a few answers to that. The first is that my hemochromatosis, in some ways, before my diagnosis with it, allowed for that adventurous life. Uh, this is, back in 2005, I think it was, uh, which was one of my last big, trekking years. I was in Peru, and it was in the Andes in a region called the Cordillera Blanca. And it's not Everest level climbing, but we got up to about between 14 and 15,000 feet. Uh, and this is before my diagnosis. This is years before my diagnosis. and I'm hiking with some people who are significantly younger than me, and I'm really for a lot of it just kind of running up the hills. And then at the at the top of the mountain we're at camp and it's 14,000 feet and I light a cigarette. Um, and only to find out years later that part of the reason that I was able to operate healthfully at 14, 15,000 feet is because of my hemochromatosis. Before it started to do the damage, I had so much hemoglobin because my body was trying to find anywhere to put these damn extra iron atoms that it had popped up my hemoglobin level. So I was essentially blood doping unintentionally. So at first, it was a real benefit, made me feel like a Superman. Then I got sick from it and it collapsed. And I felt that all of that was lost and gone forever. And there was one night I was in the hospital as probably in my second week, maybe early third week, in the hospital on the cardiac ward. And I got a call from my younger brother, Ed, who was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And Ed and I have been adventuring partners for all of our lives. He's 5 years younger than me. And a lot of the adventuring that we had done was in Alaska. We did a lot of backcountry stuff up there, and he called up, and I'm sort of like, I think I'd begun my, I had begun my phlebotomy at that point, so I'm a little bit kind of loose in my head anyway because I'm down on blood. I'm so goddamn sick I can barely get out of bed. And we just started reminiscing about our times on the Chilkoot Trail and in the Wrangell Mountains, and just having a laugh over the phone. And when we were finishing the call, he said, we really got to do that again. We've got to get back up to Alaska. And I said, that's a really good idea. And I just decided in that moment that I was going to go back to Alaska. I was going to go hiking. I was going to do backcountry hiking again. And it led to one of the funnier scenes, I guess, tragically funny. So that conversation happens. One night in the hospital. And the next morning, I wake up and, my mom is there, Mercedes is there, and then the doctors show up. And it's Dr. Niab. And she is looking severe. She's looking serious. And she says, we have to have a conversation. At this point, I already know that a liver transplant is likely in my future. But that day, Dr. Niab came in and she said she was talking with a heart surgeon and looking at the level of damage that had been done to my heart. They were pretty sure that I was going to need a heart liver transplant in order to survive. And they felt that day, this was the conversation we needed to have, is that in order for me to have a chance of living long enough to get to the top of a donors list for a heart liver transplant, which they estimated would take about 7 years, I would need to have a heart pump, a ventricular assist device, a left ventricular assist device, or something like that, surgically implanted. And so she described it, and she said the doctor would cut into my chest and he would take a small electric motor called an impeller and would surgically attach it to my left ventricle. And that impeller would then it would spin at like 1,000 rotations a minute or something like that. And that would then pump the blood through my system. And she said it would make up for about 90% of my cardiac function. She also noted that after they did this procedure, I would no longer have a heartbeat, nor would I have a blood pressure. I would just have this impeller pushing the blood through my system. She also said that since it's a device that needs to be powered, the surgeon would have to leave a port coming out of my chest for a plug where I could plug myself into a wall or a battery pack. And when she mentioned the battery pack, I was very interested. And I'm laying in bed, and Dr. Nayab, it was my mom, Mercedes, Dr. Nayab, and me in bed. And she is having this serious conversation. She is having a serious conversation, basically telling me that my life is about to change permanently. Because once this ventricular assist device goes in, there's no going back. They can't take it out again. You are going to have a heart transplant at that point. But I didn't really care about that. She said that this thing had batteries. And so I'm coming at this from a conversation that I'd had the night before with my brother Ed. And I've decided I'm going to go to Alaska. So when she mentioned the batteries, I kind of perked up and I said, "How much do they weigh?" And she said, "I'm sorry?" I said, "How much do the batteries weigh? Are they like a pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds? Do you know?" And she said, I don't know. I think maybe a pound or two. And I asked her if she could find that out. She said, "Yeah, I guess." Um, and she said, "Do you have any other questions?" I said, "Yeah, are they waterproof?" And she looked at me. I remember she looked at my mom and looked at Mercedes like, what the hell is he talking about? And I didn't understand why she was not getting this. And then I realized I hadn't told her that I was going to Alaska. And so I said, "Oh, I talked to my brother last night. We decided that I'm going to Alaska next summer. And we're going to do some backcountry hiking. And so if I'm going to do some backcountry hiking, most of our trips are like 7 to 10 days. And so obviously I'm going to need to take enough batteries. So I need to know how much they weigh." And I remember saying to her, I said, "And also they have to be waterproof because even if the map says you're not going to have to ford a river, you always have to ford a river in the backcountry. So they have to be waterproof." And she just kind of like pulled away and looked at my mom and she said, maybe we can have this conversation another time. And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And then she left the room and she asked my mom to go speak to her in the hallway, clearly to have a conversation. Like, "Can you talk to your kid? He obviously doesn't know what the hell is going on here." Uh, but the reason that I mentioned that is you asked about the adventurous life and its impact on, or the adventurous life, the diagnosis, and the impact on life. What my brother did for me in that conversation, uh, irrationally, fully irrationally, but very, very importantly, he gave me a goal, and uh, he gave me permission to dream and to hope about something better. And I began to guide myself in that direction. It became a North Star, if you will, that I was going to get back into the big mountains. It's 10 years later. I am now healthy enough to once again climb up to 13, 14,000 feet. I haven't done it yet. But I do regularly go out running. I live at 5,000 feet altitude and I generally run at about 7,000 feet. But it was the adventurous life in its own way provided a bit of a slingshot back towards, wanting to get back to something like I had known before was impelling in that way, to move me back towards health. Also, no scars. I still have my original heart and my original liver. We ended up not having to do the transplant. We did not do the ventricular assist device. I just managed to heal on my own, with the help of some good medicine and some phlebotomies. But the way that the adventurous life really did help to impel me forward was by giving me a goal to work towards, and something that I could hold in my heart is something I remembered. I remember what the sky looks like, from the top of a mountain ridge in Alaska at dawn, and I wanted to get back to that, and I will.
So what's something about living with hemochromatosis that most people don't realize?
The I would say that the most beautiful thing about it, is, see how to put this. As I alluded to before, without without taking anything away from the terrible experiences so many people have with any diseases, rare diseases or common diseases, is for me, uh, I found living with hemochromatosis is a beautiful experience. Um, and a way to describe this, it goes back to understanding mortality. Um, uh, as I've mentioned, I live in Guatemala, and while I'm not 100% fluent in Spanish, I can communicate. And in Spanish, there are there are two verbs for the concept to know. There is saber and conocer. Saber is to know informationally. It is to if you want to know how many people live in Barcelona, you would use saber, the saber form of how to know how many people live there. Uh, Conocer is a far more intimate and personal understanding. Um, like you said, you live in Oregon.
Yes.
You in Portland?
Yes. Well, Beaverton, the suburb.
Okay, so if you were to say that you know Portland or you know Beaverton, you would use conocer. Yo
Mhm.
conozco Portland. Um, and for me, what hemochromatosis has done, and the most surprising thing about it, is that it has taken my understanding of my mortality from a saber construction to a conocer construction. I always knew on a conceptual level that I was mortal. We all do. Everything dies. We're going to die. We know that. But the disease that I have brought me so close to the edge of my own death. I was told I was incompatible with life, that I came back from that experience with a visceral understanding of my mortality. I know, yo conozco, what it is like to come mere centimeters from death. And I got a bit of an idea what happens when you pass over to the other side. And because of that intimate knowledge of my own mortality and a different construction than I knew it before, uh, it has it, it has added fuel to my desire to make sure that I stay on this planet as long as I possibly can. Robert Frost noted in the poem Birches that Earth is the best place for love. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And so simply by knowing the experience of having this disease and knowing that if this doesn't kill me, something else is gonna, and always having that in my mind every single day has been a beautiful, a beautiful alteration in the structure of my life. And I guess maybe what do I want people to know about hemochromatosis or really any disease is that if it can get you in touch with with the fact that you are mortal and are going to die, then there's the possibility that through that lens, you're going to be able to investigate what's truly important to you. And for me, that investigation has led it is very clear that I now understand on a cellular level, on a spiritual level, on a level that I never understood before, that absolutely the only thing that matters in this life is love. It is what everything is made of. Everything of meaning is made of love, and it's the purpose for us being here. And so, I would like people to know that that a diagnosis with a rare or terminal or deeply debilitating disease has the potential to allow you to refocus on what's important in your life. And for me, that's making connections and sharing love.
So what inspired, okay, so moving on to the book here. So what inspired you to, to write your book?
Um, So gives me an opportunity to plug my website. If anyone would, and we can include these links, I'm sure, in the
Yeah.
down below. But my website is michaeljtalon.com. Very creative. And on that, there's a splash page when you enter, and it allows you to read the introduction to the book, which I posted online. The book, by the way, is currently with my agent. I'm signing a contract later today or tomorrow. Yes, I'm very happy about that. I contract with my agent, not with a publisher, not yet. But in that introduction, I kind of tell the story about what led me to write the book, and it goes back. It's a story that starts many years before I got sick in the mid 1990s. I was at a play. I'd been invited to a play in New York City. The play was called A Couple of Blaggarts, and it was written by Frank and Malachi McCourt, both authors themselves. Malachi, there were two brothers. Malachi wrote a wonderful book called A Monk Swimming, which which he explains in the book. The title comes from his misunderstanding of the Hail Mary when he was a kid. Blessed art thou, a monk swimming. And Frank McCourt, who's the more famous of the brothers, wrote Angela's Ashes. And at this play, Malachi was on stage and Frank was in the audience. And at the end of the show, I was called down to say hello to Frank. And I absolutely he had just won the Pulitzer Prize for Angela's Ashes. And being a cool hipster New Yorker at the time, I did not want to talk to Frank McCourt about how I read his book and how it was fantastic, because I didn't want to be just yet another one of the millions of people he talked to who said that he had read his book. And so I'm going to meet him through a friend who was introducing us. And I thought, what the hell can I talk to this guy about that isn't about his book? And I remembered that Frank, before he wrote his book, was a teacher in the New York City public education system. And at the time, I was teaching high school in Brooklyn in the public system. And so I'm introduced to Frank, and I shake his hand, and avoiding the topic of the book altogether, I said, "So Frank, I hear that you were a teacher at Stuyvesant before you wrote the book. I'm a teacher over at FDR." And I asked him if he ever missed the classroom, and he said he missed the kids, but not the administration. And then he said, and he had a wonderful Irish accent, which I will butcher. And he said, "I got a question for you, boyo." He says, "What tier are you?" And it was a question that only another teacher would ask. He asked me about my retirement tier. He was tier 1, I was tier 4. And when I told him I was tier 4, he said, oh boyo, you can't retire on that. That's a pauper's pension, son. You can't retire on that. You're never going to make any money off that. And he says, "But I got an idea for you." So Frank had an idea for me. I leaned in. He says, "I'm not sure if you know, but I recently wrote myself a little book, and it's going gangbusters. Maybe you should do that. You should write yourself a book. You'll make a fortune." And so I had always had that story in my mind. And before we parted, and I turned to Frank, he was going to be taken away to another conversation. And, kind of jokingly, we're having a good conversation at the point. I said, "So, Frank, tell me, if I ever do write a book, what's your one bit of advice?" And he's the author of Angela's Ashes, which, of course, the Angela was his mother, and the ashes were her ashes after her cremation. And the one bit of advice he gave me was to make the title dark, but to fill the pages with light. And many years later, once I had been in the hospital, and once I was beginning my recovery, and once a doctor friend explained to me that I had been considered incompatible with life, I realized that I had a very dark title, and that it was a good story to tell. And it was one in which I could, in fact, in the end, fill the pages with light, because I view this experience with this debilitating disease that has caused so much suffering to have allowed me to refocus my life onto living in a more positive and vital way. And so the decision was, one, I'm a writer. It's what I do. I wrote a magazine. I write essays all the time. I do a lot of political commentary. And helicopter going overhead. Hang on just one second. I live in a helicopter corridor. But it was an opportunity. I've made this joke with a number of people before, but if you're a writer, the best thing about almost dying is the almost part, and the second best thing, but a very, very close second, is it finally gives you a story to tell. And it was a story that had the meat to hold up, to hold up 250 pages of work, and it also gave me something to do. This is just one other thing that I actually don't often think about or talk about. But at the time, like in the first years of my recovery, when at first I could only walk for around the block once. I could only sit up in a chair for half an hour at a time. Just the simple act of sitting at a computer and concentrating for a few hours, and to get your brain to focus on something for a few hours at a time. When I started writing, actually trying to tell this story, was a part of the recovery in and of itself. It was as much as going to the gym. It was sort of like going to the gym for my brain. So that's why I wrote the book.
So what's the hardest part about writing about your illness?
Huh. It's all of our lives are social lives, right? We don't live just for ourselves. We live within communities, and we live within a family. And at the time that I was writing my book, and it was early in my recovery from 2015, 2016, 2017, there were some members of my family who were having some other serious health problems as well. And they were deeply impactful on everything, because we are a social creature. My story was intertwined with their stories. And so technically, the hardest thing about writing the book, and also emotionally, the hardest thing about writing the book, was trying to figure out how to tell a narrative through line that made sense, but that I only have the right to tell my own story. And so I had to, in some ways, work around some of the other issues that were happening in my family at the time, because I didn't have the right to speak about what was going on with other people. And doing so could have caused pain. So technically that was difficult. To be able to tell a true story while also protecting the privacy of other family members. The hardest thing about writing about the disease itself, well, as I think any of your readers understand, like, I mean, I'm speaking almost cavalierly about how my experience with hemochromatosis and this disease have led to a a new place of healthfulness and mindfulness and joy at simply being alive. But arriving at that point is not easy. I mean, writing about wanting to die, writing about suicide attempt, is inherently painful, because it's embarrassing to remember, our weaknesses. Part of what I now, actually, I'm glad I get a chance to segue into this. I've now adapted to this in my life, and I think in a healthful way. But it was difficult to come to. Part of the damage, which is not life-threatening, of hemochromatosis is it does significant damage to your glandular system, or it can. And in my case, the damage to my glandular system was with my testicles. I do not produce testosterone, uh, which is why my libido had been slipping in the years before my diagnosis. Um, and writing about laying in a bathtub and realizing that I had come to a point, I didn't know there were treatments yet, that I had come to a point of sexual death, that I was just simply insensate. I had no libido, I had no sex drive, I had no sensation when touching myself. I was sure that this was going to mean that I would never again be able to make love to my partner, or to be a man. And I've since expanded my understanding of what that is. And I now speak about this more fully, but it was difficult to write about it first. I am on hormone replacement therapy, and so I do a testosterone injection every 2 weeks. Um, and that was difficult to confront just because it got to, some issues of root identity, and to be able to be vulnerable enough to write about my struggles with my sexual health was probably the most difficult part of the emotionally of writing it, but also probably one of the most fruitful parts as well, because now I really do make an effort to be open. I'm open with my friends and in my community about being on hormone replacement therapy, because I think doing so, particularly for a man, I think that it has been more common at least over the course of my lifetime, for women when they go through menopause to do hormone replacement therapy, but it is not often talked about when men have to do it. And so I find that it's socially beneficial to be open about those things, because if we speak about these things, we remove taboos about these things. It allows other people to hear and to not feel alone, and to seek some help and guidance as well.
So what did you learn anything along the way about yourself when writing the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, then I've alluded to it in the conversation already,
Yeah.
but really the fundamental lesson uh, is understanding we struggle with purpose and meaning, or many of us struggle with purpose and meaning in this life. Uh, what are we here for? What are we supposed to be doing? And coming so close to the exit and having that, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it said before, or seen it written in a meme or something like that, like nobody gets to their deathbed and wishes they spent more time in the office. You
Yeah.
know, we get to the end of the show, and there's a sudden realization that the only goddamn thing that mattered, was the love that we shared, and that and and for me, so much of it was a clear understanding that life really only has two variables. It's the amount of time you have and the amount of love that you get to experience in that time. Uh, and and love is an active process. And so what I learned most about myself and about existence in general was simply that. It's that, one, you're mortal, kid. You're gonna die. And every day that you wake up, you are one day closer to the day you are going to die. And so invariably, every time the clock ticks, the finite amount of time that you have left in this world, it is always decreasing. And so the only thing you can do to increase your purposefulness and your meaningfulness in this world is, one, try and expand that time as far as possible. Stay healthy, stay fit, mind your health. Don't walk in front of buses. Don't kill yourself in a bathtub. Uh, but the other way you do it is by actively engaging your skills and your abilities and your artistic nature to love and to create. And for me, I've thought about this a lot, as you can tell. For me, love essentially has three fundamental wavelengths, and those wavelengths are truth, beauty, and light. And so, part of what my disease helped me to understand is that this life, if we are to make it purposeful and as meaningful as it possibly can be, we should live in truth. We should apprehend, create, and transmit as much beauty and light as we can in the limited amount of time that we have to do so. And so that's what has most profoundly changed with me since then, is an understanding of I know why I'm here on the planet. It's not to build a tower to heaven. It's certainly at this point, I'm nearly 60 years old. I'm not going to cure cancer. But what I can do is share a story, and what I can do is support the people in my world and to share love in its three constituent wavelengths of truth, beauty, and light.
The reader could take away one message from your book. What would it be?
Call your mother. I say that kind of jokingly, but or call your dad. My dad passed this summer, so I can't call him anymore. But I can think about him. And really, it's as simple as that. Like, what's the message to take away is that you've got a limited amount of time, and that all of the other bullshit doesn't matter. What something's going to kill you. It's not going to be, for most people, it's not going to be hemochromatosis. It's not going to be hemophilia. It's not going to be one of the rare diseases that brings us together and helps us to form this community that you shaped around this podcast. But we're all going to die of something. And there's a wonderful poem by a poet named Robert W. Service. I first started reading Service. It was part of what brought me to Alaska. He wrote up there in the late 19th century. And he has a great poem called Just Think. And it is, just think some night the stars may gleam upon a cold gray stone, and trace a name with a silver beam, and lo, 'twill be your own. That night is speeding on to meet your epitaphic rhyme. Your life is just a little beat within the heart of time, a little fame, a little pain, a laugh lest ye may moan, a little shame, a little fame, a star gleam on a stone. We're all heading to the exit door, so call your mother, or your daughter, or your brother, or your lover, or your best friend, and share with them in this day something that is of truth, beauty, or light, and share with them the love, because that's all we got. That I would like to see in the medical community for people my age, or for people who are, for all of the millions of people out there right now who are in their 20s and 30s who have hemochromatosis and have yet to be diagnosed. I would love for people to learn more about this particular disease so that they could self-advocate for themselves when they go to the doctor. But also, I would like this to be something that doctors would. There's so much sense in the specialization in the medical industry. I am really, really, really glad that Dr. Judith Lynn, my hematologist, was as good as she was at blood, because without her incredibly detailed and well filigreed understanding of blood chemistry, I would not be here. And yet, doctors are trained because, the hepatologist does liver, the cardiologist does heart, the hematologist does blood, that it's this disease presentation that if you're a liver doctor and a patient is presenting to you, as I did at 48 years old, with hemochromatosis and liver cirrhosis, what you're going to see is you see the liver cirrhosis, right?
Mhm.
If you're a GP and you test somebody's blood sugar, you're going to see diabetes. Um, so I guess I would like there to be some broadening out from the very narrow scopes that we have truncated our specialists into. And to his credit, Dr. Dietrich, my liver doctor, uh, was the one who ordered the tests for the ferritin profile and for the genetic screening. They just didn't come back for a few days, and it was a cardiologist who eventually saw them. But it would have been nice if, when I went to the GP before all of this, he had done the test, or she had done the test. And I think that's something that it just more public information about hemochromatosis, I think, would go a long way to helping the doctors in the community realize that there's this thing that mimics other diseases very, very well, or is at the root of these other diseases, and that they need to look a little bit farther than just the initial diagnosis. And to add to that, partially because like a few things just from my personal history. Like the first drug that I was given for my initial diagnosis with diabetes was metformin. I was given that by my GP, who knew I had diabetes but didn't know that I had liver disease, and metformin is metabolized by the liver. And so the metformin I was taking was doing liver damage while I was taking it. The liver doctor, who saw that I had portal vein hypertension and needed to save me from that, prescribed me with Nadolol, a beta blocker, so that I would lower my portal vein hypertension, not knowing I had heart disease. And so the two of the interventions that were first initiated for my diabetes and for my liver cirrhosis were just causing more add-on problems. The metformin caused more liver damage. The liver medication caused more heart damage. And so if you could just pull out the lens a little bit more and see that this is a problem, a more global problem, it would be helpful. And also right now, all of the medications that I have to take because of my liver damage, they have to be designed to be metabolized by the kidneys. And thank God my kidneys are still working. So now rather than metformin, I take a drug called Januvia. My blood thinner, I don't take warfarin or Eliquis because they're metabolized by the liver. I take Pradaxo, which is metabolized by the kidneys. So now that we have this overarching diagnosis, we can target my medicines so that they don't cause add-on problems with my other medical conditions. So I kind of wish that doctors just had a little bit more of a global view. And more than anything, that patients and parents advocate for themselves. It drives me nuts that like it's a genetic condition. So like, you know, if you diagnose one member of a family with it, then one, it is the responsibility of the other members of that family to go see their doctors. But also, if there's a family, it's something that should be checked on family history. Do you have a family history of mental illness? Do you have a family history of hemochromatosis? Because then it would just you would get people more attuned to doing the genetic profile testing and to get it before the damage starts to be done.
Um, what would your let's see, what would you give to what advice would you give to someone newly diagnosed with hemochromatosis?
Don't give up. Don't give up. It's hard. Uh, but there are going to be lifestyle changes, but the lifestyle changes that hemochromatosis requires are in general lifestyle changes that would be good for anyone. And it sucks to be forced into them. And anyone such as yourself, Joanna, who has to heavily adjust their diet. I mean, you start to understand like exactly how big a role the consumption of healthful food or any food uh, takes up as a part of your daily activities. But also, these are things that we can adjust to. Like, you know, because of my diabetes, I don't eat a lot. I still have desserts. Don't tell anybody. But I've almost entirely cut out bread. I'm, an Irishman who's largely given up potatoes. And that's all so I can have a tiramisu every once in a while. But like, they're not easy changes to make, but also for most people, and it's not the same for everyone. But eating that much carb in any given day it's converted into sugar, which does damage, and so it's a pain in the butt to do. But once you make the transition, I don't really miss bread at all. Strangely, I eat a lot of cashews now, which somehow take the role of bread for me. But my one message to someone who's recently diagnosed is don't give up, advocate for yourself. And if any of you are hearing this broadcast, hearing this podcast, and you just want to touch base, drop me a line.
Let's see. What role do you think patient advocacy and storytelling plays in raising awareness for our diseases?
I think patient advocacy, self-advocacy in the medical community, particularly in the United States, is absolutely necessary on all fronts and all levels, all the goddamn time. And it's not. I have I have a lot of complaints about the financing system for the United States, the medical system in the United States. And I know there are other systems out there. But in the United States, the insurance stuff is madness, and the prices are out of control, and but the care is excellent. If you add, or it can be excellent, and guaranteeing it will be excellent is by being a little bit of a squeaky wheel. There was one moment where I was the first couple of days in the hospital. I in the midst of all of this, somehow the medical community had not realized that I had developed really bad sleep apnea. I was bloated. I was carrying about 40 pounds of retained fluid. I was heavy, and I needed a CPAP. I needed to wear a CPAP machine, which they hadn't given me, probably because they didn't hear me experiencing sleep apnea when they were when I was in the room and they were out in the hall. And it was terrible because every time I closed my eyes, I was having these dreadful nightmares about being basically pursued by death, because I was not breathing when I closed my eyes. And I remember very clearly my mom, who's now 83, she was 73 at the time, a demure, mindful, thoughtful, polite, kind woman. When I took a nap in the afternoon and in the bed, and I started to experience bad sleep apnea, she just absolutely lost her mind and started shouting at one of the nurses to get me an effing CPAP before the end of the goddamn day. And because of her advocacy on my behalf, I got the thing that I needed. And so, as simple as that, just saying I have a problem. The other thing I would suggest for self-advocacy is, particularly with rare diseases, is that the doctors who specialize in these conditions, almost to a rule, do not have them themselves. They have studied about them. They have learned about them. They know about them in the saber construction, but they don't know about them in the conocer construction. And because of that, they have no idea what the lived experience is. And I use that phrase so often when speaking to my doctors when I was in the hospital, and in the time since I've been out of the hospital. They would tell me something, and I would say, that's very interesting, but in my lived experience, this is what is happening. And just by phrasing it like that, by in my lived experience, it establishes, and I suggest that phrase to anybody who's self-advocating. Just by using that phrase, in my lived experience, you are claiming authority that no one else has. And you are able to take this and you are able to say, this is what is happening in my body from what I can tell, and force the doctors down to that moment. And storytelling. that's what we do. It's what we've been doing for 100,000 years. Which is what the Neanderthals were doing when they first developed hemochromatosis. Because you sit around the fire and you tell stories to one another, and by sharing those stories with one another, we realize that there are shared experiences, and the shared experiences can build into cultural belief and can lead towards better advocacy for healthcare in general.
You've touched on the reason why I'm trying to get this into a university. I'm
Oh,
trying to
so
get this podcast into a university to give doctors a little bit more education than the paragraph in a textbook that they have.
oh yeah. Yeah, and thank you very much. I want to thank you specifically, Joanna, for actually creating this format for these discussions. I have wanted to do advocacy. I've made some videos that are on my website that do a little bit of education into hemochromatosis. They're on a video page there if anybody wants to check them out. But it's really it's the way it's different than it was 100,000 years ago when we were all sitting around the campfire is that people don't gather anywhere for these stories unless you create the space for them to gather. And so thank you for doing that.
Do you have any future projects
Sure
related
hope
to
so.
related to rare diseases advocacy or writing or traveling?
Um, well, right now, my professional energy is focused. I'm contracting with an agent to who's going to try and find a publisher for the book. And I am, amongst other things, trying to get myself onto some different podcasts to have conversations with hosts such as yourself to try and spread some awareness both of the book and of the condition. Um, and for future travel plans, there is a big ass volcano that is very close to where I live in Guatemala, and I plan to climb it very soon. It's not quite the 14,500 feet that I hit in the Andes, the 15,000 I hit in the Himalaya, but it's 13.5. Kind of want to do that for a
Hopefully it doesn't
challenge.
explode before then.
Well, actually, it's wonderful. The volcano is called Acatenango, and it looks down over an active volcano called Volcan Fuego. And so it's really dramatic. Acatenango is a dormant or extinct volcano, and it's just far enough from Fuego that if Fuego blows, you're probably still going to be okay. But I'm
Yeah.
hoping to do that soon. And also, I am very much hoping to finally get back up to Alaska. It has been a long, long time. And at nearly 60 years old, I got to say I'm not as crazy about sleeping on the cold ground as I was when I was in my 30s. I could rough it for a little while, and I want to get back out and do some hiking back in Alaska, where so much of my adventuring was when I was younger.
Yeah. Been to Alaska a couple times. They have anything there where they turn their trees upside down and they flower out the top. It's on a cruise ship, and
Oh,
it's
neat.
uh, um. Have you have you noticed any unexpected effects of the changing in of changing your diet?
Yes. Oh, yes. Changing my diet, and if we expand that out from food to any intake, the biggest change in my diet is that I simply don't consume alcohol anymore. And the changes simply from that, even if I didn't have liver disease, if you're drinking a 6 pack or a 12 pack of beer a day, you're going to end up with a beer belly. And so by removing that from my life, my physical fitness has improved. And with my diet, it's the cutting out of the almost not entirely, but really, really, really cutting back on carbs has also been helpful. I had to have my gallbladder removed about a year and a half ago. I had an attack, and so I'm a little bit limited in my abilities to consume really fatty foods. But I've gotten to a point where I can eat a steak every now and again. I eat a lot of chicken. And so my diet is mostly lean protein, vegetables, fruits, and yeah, it's aside from being a healthy diet for hemochromatosis, it's just essentially a healthy diet. And so, well, it took some adjusting. I I feel great. It's a healthy diet. It keeps me fit.
Many people with hemochromatosis struggle with uh, sources of with hidden sources of iron in foods. Are there any surprise foods you learned um, to to be cautious about?
The one that I've tried to get away from is you just what you learn with hemochromatosis uh, is that so many processed foods uh, are iron fortified, and in some ways it kind of makes sense from a marketing angle that like iron is strong, and so if you give people more iron, they will be more strong. Um, and it's just that is one, it's crazy. No
Mhm.
one needs to be eating iron fortified foods. You really do get enough iron, just with human beings have been getting enough iron from their diet unless they were really 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 starved of protein, or other sources of iron for months at a time. You're going to be okay. But milk and all the other things that have added iron are kind of a pain in the ass to avoid. But also, I've come to a point where I've lowered my intake of the heaviest hit is always red meat. It's anything. It's the iron is in the blood, and so any red meat is going to have a lot of iron in it. And so if you avoid that, having a little bit of milk in your coffee isn't going to cause too much of a problem. But it's really trying to limit the for me anyway, it's been limiting the big hit iron intakes and not worrying so much about spinach or milk in my coffee.
Uh, Many people with hemochromatosis struggle with hidden. Oh, we just did that one. Okay, so yeah. Do you think there's enough public awareness about iron overload in foods?
No, but I also have no expectation that that will change at any point. The you know with the it is a rare enough disease that I can't imagine big milk deciding that they're going to launch a campaign to stop fortifying it with iron because too many people believe that drinking milk fortified with iron is good for them. So I don't think that's going to change. And it's more about just educating the person who has hemochromatosis to educate themselves, and to do the dietary readjustments on their own. And also the other thing is so so much of so much of the balance of living a healthful life, like it sucks getting diagnosed with anything.
Mhm.
Uh, and if but if the result of the diagnosis is a change in behavioral pattern, both in intake with food and a change in behavioral pattern with living a more healthful life, I mean, those are the things that are it's not only the self advocacy within the medical community, but the self advocacy within your own interior domain. You need to constantly remind yourself that there's only one of these lives, and it's your job to navigate it as best as you can. And so for me, rather than trying to figure out how to get big milk to get rid of iron, it is that I need to know that I need to keep my phlebotomy schedule if I'm going to need them. I need to keep an eye on my iron levels, and I need to keep exercising. I also, interestingly, it's I find this kind of fascinating. My experience with hemochromatosis is going to be a little. Everybody's is going to be a little bit different, uh, because we're complex systems and it's a complex disease. One one of the consequences, if we go back to the beginning, with a portal vein hypertension for which Dr. Dietrich gave me the Nadolol, I had overpressurization in my liver that was squeezing the portal vein. That overpressurization blew the pressure forward in my system, and I ended up with what are called varices, which are essentially varicose veins in my esophagus. And I have gastropathy, which is essentially varicose veins in my stomach lining. And I have severe and pervasive gastropathy, which means that my stomach is sort of continually leaking blood into my digestive system, which I then pass when I go to the bathroom when I have a sit down. And so part of my balancing of my iron levels, it's almost like my body collapsed into this in many ways, and one of the ways it collapsed was into this like collapsed but solid structure. I in essence am self-phlebotomizing all the time. And that's not something that everyone with hemochromatosis is going to end up with. But I'm losing blood on a drip of blood on a daily basis, which helps to keep my iron levels balanced.
Do you enjoy cooking, or do you find meal planning challenging with your condition?
It is an excellent question, and it depends on if I have company or not. When I generally live alone, and when I live alone, I have really kind of taken my diet down to a very utilitarian level. I know what I can eat. I know what tastes good to me. Um, and I don't have a whole lot of variety in my diet. Like, I hope my cholesterol never gets weird because I am a murderer of chicken eggs. I eat eggs every day for breakfast. I have 2 or 3 eggs for breakfast every day. And I do that because there are no carbs. To manage my diabetes, I need to have a heavy protein intake with any meal because that helps to regulate my blood sugar. Uh, and I eat a lot of cashews. For dinner, I have chicken or I order tacos because I do live in Guatemala. Um, and then if I have a guest, I can enjoy some creative cooking, but I'm in no way a chef of any kind. But I can make a couple of dishes that will at least get someone interested in spending time with me. But eventually, I'm going to run out of things to cook. So I just kind of eat simply when I'm on my own.
A lot of this is my YouTube channel is actually a cooking channel.
Oh, sure.
So, how do you balance social situations and dining out while keeping iron intake in check?
It's really almost at any restaurant. The bigger issue, rather than the iron, but was part of the condition early on, was going into social situations where everyone was drinking. And part of that was simply by deciding that I was not going to do that anymore. And so I drink a lot of seltzer. And at some point, you tell your friends enough times that you're not drinking, and they stop trying to get you to drink. In social settings, my diet is far less cumbersome to manage than even celiac disease or a lactose intolerance. Like, pretty much on any menu at any restaurant, if I'm feeling that I need to watch my iron levels, I order the fish or I order the chicken rather than the steak. And I often, though almost everybody in my social sphere knows that I have experienced that I have this genetic condition. I don't need to like make it a point at a meal. I can always find something on a menu that's gonna serve my needs.
Mhm.
It's so much of it, as I noted earlier, that I'm no chef, and
Mhm.
give me my morning breakfast. It is a breakfast I eat pretty much every single day. Is a
Mhm.
couple of eggs with cottage cheese mixed in to make them nice and creamy, and a fistful of cashews thrown in, along with some tomatoes or something diced up in there.
Yeah. What foods do you avoid? Do you have to avoid to limit or keep or what foods do you have to avoid or limit to keep iron levels under control?
Oh, it's mostly red meat. That's the big one. That's
Mhm.
really the one you have to keep an eye on. There, spinach, as we know from Popeye,
Yep.
has iron too. Kale has iron, but really the big hitter, there's just no way around it. It's red meat. Red meat is the one that you have to be most mindful of.
Mhm. Are there any foods that actually help regulate iron absorption that you found helpful?
Not so much. No, it's more. It's not so much. It's not like trying to do dietary chelation in any way. It's really just avoid the intake.
Mhm. Uh, did uh, did managing your diet feel overwhelming at first?
Oh God, yes. Oh
How did
God,
you
yes.
adapt?
I think anyone who's had to adjust their diet, it's like, and I kind of alluded to it before, but you just don't recognize how important and how
Yeah,
much of your day is spent thinking about what you're going to eat and then eating it, or creating what you're going to eat. And so when it's like, oh, just change your diet. It's like, well, that's a significant part of my day. And yeah, it was very, very, very challenging at first, and I overcorrected in a lot of ways at first. I also was I had cardiac disease at the time, and so the doctor told me to avoid salt. And having to avoid salt is it's sort of like Greek god level punishment for a human being, to go from eating like really savory foods, and then you have to give up salt. And thank God I've been able to reintroduce salt into my system. And I tried for a while when I wasn't eating salt to bring in other spices, but nothing is salt. Um, and so it was definitely overwhelming at first, but ultimately navigable. And again, I just go back all for me, it goes back all the time, uh, to understanding that, like, yes, this is an enormous pain in the ass to have to make all of these profound changes in my diet and the way I live my life. But the reward for making these changes is that I'm not going to die, and I'm going to be able to live longer. And for me, hokey as it sounds, the longer I live, is the more time that I have to fulfill my purpose on this planet, which is to share love with as many people as I can and as deeply as I can. So, if I got to skip a steak and have a chicken, uh, now anyway, that seems like it's not that big a deal. But when it first happened, it was so defeating. It was like, why can't I just be me, and eat the things, do the things that I've always loved to do? Woe is me. And yeah, and it does suck, but also having some perspective, and now having lived with this for 10 years, the knowledge of it, having lived with it for 58 years, but the knowledge of it for 10 years, the changes don't seem, I'm glad I made the changes. I'm glad that I was put through I was run through the gauntlet, run through the gauntlet of having to make these changes, because in the end, I'm happier now than I've ever been.
So looking back, is there anything that you had um, you wish you had uh, known sooner about hemochromatosis?
Well, on one level, yes, absolutely. I wish that I had been diagnosed with this when I was a child, so I didn't have to end up at, you know 58 years old with major health problems. And I'm fit and healthy now. I'm also aware that that healthfulness is a transient experience. And I need to, after I get off this call, I'm going to have to get back in touch with the radiology unit at Mount Sinai because I need to schedule my next liver MRI. I have to have 2 liver MRIs a year because the extent of my cirrhosis puts me at a 20 times higher risk factor for developing liver cancer than the general population. And I don't want that to happen. And so I need to be mindful of it. I am very glad that I'm on hormone replacement therapy, but I'm also aware that if my prostate specific antigen levels start to go up, I'm going to have to go off of that. And I'm going to have to confront my sexual death. And so I wish that I'd known all of this a long time before. Then on the other side, I don't complain too heavily about the experiences that I've had because they have led me to do some introspection that I never would have done otherwise. And that introspection has led me to a place where I feel more at peace and more connected to my life than I ever had before. So I would have liked to have known these things to avoid the great hardships that they've caused, but I'm also very, very thankful for the hardships they caused because those hardships led to wisdom.
Mm-hmm. How can listeners support you and your book and the hemochromatosis community?
The couple of different questions in there. The best way that they can support me is when the book comes out. The title, stick it in your brain, is Incompatable with Life, a story of grave illness, great love, and survival. And if you would like, you can visit my website at michaeljtalon.com, read that introduction, leave a comment. Also, I would appreciate a follow on my socials. We'll include them in the links below, but I'm most easily found on Facebook, at least for the time being. Talk to the rest of your family members and have them get tested too, because chances are you're going to get it. Funny, actually, quick side story. Look, I'm a first-time author. This is the first book I've ever written. Anybody who's tried to get a book published and that's not, last name is not Kardashian, you realize that you run into a buzzsaw of problems because nobody, you got a great story, but nobody gives a damn. And I tried to find an agent in New York and in LA and I got a couple of polite rejection letters. But I had sort of a brainstorm, and I thought, why am I not looking into agents who are in the UK or Ireland, where this disease is more common? And my agent that I have is from Northern Ireland, and I wrote my pitch letter to him, and he wrote back to me immediately, and he said, my wife's family has this. And so yeah, if you're in one of those populations, dig in, see if you're one of us. Mm-hmm. One of us hemochromatites.
Yes. If you could have if you could leave us with one piece of wisdom or encouragement, what would it be?
It really goes back to what I said before about calling your mother, or your lover, or your daughter, or your cousin, or your best friend. It is the blessing of a diagnosis with a disease is that it brings us closer to an understanding of our mortality, and an understanding of a mortality brings us closer to an understanding of the miracle that it is that we exist at all. And keeping focused in my mind every single day that I am going to die is counterintuitively, perhaps it is the most enlivening message that I know and that I share with myself daily, because it reminds me again that the only goddamn thing that matters is love. So embrace that. You're not here for a long time. None of us, even those of us who live to be 105, are not here for a very long time, and there's never enough time to love.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible story, your journey with hereditary hemochromatosis from diagnosis to advocacy is both inspiring and eye-opening. We truly appreciate your honesty and the work you're doing to raise awareness. To our listeners and viewers, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Rare Chef, and my podcast, Rare Connection. Your support helps us continue to bring awareness to rare diseases and connect patients with vital resources. If you're listening to the audio version of this, you can also text me through the link in the show. Send me a text in the show notes. If you're on the video side, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. From those who want to support the show, there is also a support the show link in the show notes on the audio side. I'm not monetized on YouTube yet. Just a quick note with that if you do decide to donate, it is not yet tax deductible. I do not have a 501c3 yet. I'm working on it, but not yet. But everything helps, and it will be put towards the nonprofit that I am also starting to start now. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that if you or someone you know is struggling, help is available. You can call or text 988 for the Suicide Crisis Lifeline to speak with someone 24/7. You are not alone, and there is always someone ready to listen. Thank you again for being part of Thank you again for being here. Until next time, stay connected, stay informed, and take care of yourself. See you next time. See you in the next episode.